This morning, we have all now resigned from the Labour Party. This has been a very difficult, painful, but necessary decision. From today, we will all sit in Parliament as a new independent group of MPs. For my part, I have become embarrassed and ashamed to remain in the Labour Party. I cannot remain in a party that I have today come to the sickening conclusion is institutionally.
The hollow court. How Keir Starmer lost his cabinet, his credibility, and what remains of his government. The walls of Downing Street are not shaking anymore. They have already come down. What you are witnessing in the spring of 2026 is not a government weathering a storm. It is the aftermath of one. A political structure that was supposed to represent a generational reset of British public life has, in the space of barely 18 months, reduced itself to a crime scene.
I don't think it's right to make those comparisons. It's completely different. And the Prime Minister said yesterday, I think almost in the same breath, talked about the diverse country that we are and that being part of our strength.
I'm not saying it is Enoch Powell. I'm saying, did he know? Yeah. Did his speechwriters know? Did you know that he was echoing Enoch Powell?
I don't know. I didn't.
And are you uncomfortable with it?
You know, everybody always gets caught up in focusing on different phrases and so on. But we do have to be talking about the policies. And if you look at what the Prime Minister said yesterday, he talked about people who came after the war to work in the UK to build some of our services and how important that was. But he also talked about how immigration has to be properly controlled and managed. And it hasn't been.
We'll come to the controls, I promise.
I actually think it's okay to have.
And the question that every serious observer of this country's politics must now sit with is a brutally simple one. How did a Prime Minister who ran on ethics end up here? Let's begin with the woman who just walked out of the Home Office. Yvette Cooper's departure is not a footnote. It is a verdict. When a Home Secretary who has spent decades positioning herself as one of Labour's most intellectually rigorous and institutionally serious figures decides that the ship is no longer worth defending, you are no longer watching a political crisis. You are watching a political coroner issue a finding. Cooper does not leave governments lightly. She leaves governments that are no longer governable. Welcome to British Connors. If you are new here, this is your home for political analysis that does not treat you like a focus group participant. We are not going to tell you this is a challenging period for the Prime Minister or that the government needs to reset its messaging. We are going to tell you what is actually happening at the level it is actually happening with the precision and the frankness that British political commentary has been sorely missing. Before we go further into what is unfolding in Whitehall, do yourself a genuine favor and subscribe to British Connors right now. Hit that button, turn on your notifications, and join a community that has decided that political literacy is not a luxury. It is a responsibility. Subscribe to British Connors, and let us do this together. Now, back to the wreckage. The departure of Yvette Cooper brings the cabinet exodus into double digits. Think about what that sentence actually means. 10 or more of the people who were supposed to be running the country, who stood in those cabinet photographs with their freshly pressed authority, have decided they would rather not. That is not a reshuffle. That is a dissolution. And to understand how a government that won one of the largest parliamentary majorities in recent history arrived at this point, you have to understand the Mandelson problem, because the Mandelson problem is really the Starmer problem, and the Starmer problem is a problem of character, judgment, and the catastrophic miscalculation that you can appoint a man like Peter Mandelson and expect the country not to eventually open the filing cabinet. The Metropolitan Police investigation is no longer a rumor passed between political correspondents in the Strangers' Bar. Search warrants have been executed. The Prince of Darkness has been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The specific allegation that market-sensitive tax data and advance intelligence about a Prime Minister's resignation were being funneled to Jeffrey Epstein, while Mandelson occupied a seat at the cabinet table, is not the kind of allegation that a government survives. It is the kind of allegation that defines what a government was. And what this government was, it turns out, was a place where a Prime Minister read a 2-page box note outlining Mandelson's visits to an already convicted sex offender's property, understood the national security implications, weighed the warnings from his own intelligence apparatus, and then handed Peter Mandelson a diplomatic passport anyway. If the forensic tracking of this government's moral erosion is the kind of content that you believe British political audiences deserve, then support us here at British Connors. Subscribe now. The mainstream cycle is currently working extremely hard to frame this catastrophe as a difficult patch. We are working equally hard to ensure that the record reflects the reality. Subscribe to British Connors and be part of the conversation that this establishment would very much prefer we did not have. The story of how we arrived here begins before Mandelson. It begins with Angela Rayner, the former Deputy Prime Minister, who left office over an £800,000 property arrangement and a stamp duty discrepancy that she was apparently content to let the public discover rather than disclose. Rayner's departure was the first real signal that Labour's ethical architecture was entirely performative. It was not a foundation. It was a backdrop. After Rayner came Rushanara Ali, whose rent-gouging allegations on her own properties made her position as a minister untenable while the government was simultaneously lecturing landlords. After Ali came Vicky Foxcroft, who possessed the apparently rare quality of genuine principle, resigning rather than implement welfare cuts she considered unconscionable. After Foxcroft came Tulip Siddiq, the anti-corruption minister, which remains one of the more spectacular ironies in recent parliamentary history, stepping down because her family connections to a corrupt regime were generating more heat than a government already running a temperature could absorb. And then there was Andrew Gwynn, who did not leave quietly but was removed after messages emerged showing racist and sexist commentary about his own colleagues. The messages did not just reveal bad judgment. They revealed a parliamentary culture that had tolerated a level of internal toxicity that was entirely inconsistent with the values the party had spent years proclaiming from every available platform. This is the context into which Rachel Reeves' departure must be placed. The Chancellor leaving is not simply about one minister deciding that the Treasury is no longer the right posting. It is about the most senior economic figure in the country deciding that her professional reputation cannot survive continued proximity to a prime minister whose judgment has been compromised, whose credibility has been shredded, and whose administration is now the subject of an active criminal investigation into the conduct of a man he appointed against explicit warnings. Reeves leaving tells the market something. It tells the civil service something. It tells every backbencher who has been quietly calculating their own position something. It tells them that the loyalty premium has expired. Make sure you are subscribed to British Connors right now. Because the next phase of this story, the internal parliamentary maneuvering, the question of who replaces the replacements, and the increasingly credible conversation about whether Sir Keir Starmer can survive a vote of confidence from his own members, is going to move quickly, and it is going to move in ways that the established media are institutionally ill-equipped to interpret without flinching. We do not flinch. Subscribe now and stay close. What the Mandelson criminal investigation has done, beyond the immediate political damage, is expose the structural lie at the center of the Starmer project. The entire electoral pitch of this government rested on a contrast. We are not them. We do not do what they did. We take ethics seriously. We have read Nolan. We believe in public service. That contrast has not merely been undermined. It has been inverted. The government that promised to restore trust in institutions is now the government that reportedly showed classified documents to an unvetted ambassador with a documented relationship with an international pedophile and alleged connections to hostile foreign powers. The government that positioned itself as the corrective to conservative sleaze is now the one with the most ministerial departures and the most active police engagement. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party is processing its own identity crisis in real time. The steady defection of Tory MPs to Reform UK is not simply a story about personal career calculations, though it is certainly that as well. It is a story about what happens when a centre-right party loses its sense of what it is actually for. The voters who are watching a Labour government in institutional freefall and a Conservative opposition that cannot articulate a coherent alternative are not simply becoming disillusioned. They are making a different choice. And Reform UK is, whatever one thinks of its politics or its methods, at least providing them with somewhere to make it. The political realignment of Britain is no longer a theoretical projection. It is a live event. The £75,000 taxpayer-funded payoff that features in the reporting around the Mandelson case, the redacted memos, the classified briefings provided before vetting was completed, Each of these details is individually damaging. Together, they form a picture of a government that was not merely careless with the public trust. It was cavalier with it. And it was cavalier with it while telling the country, with considerable self-satisfaction, that it had finally returned professionalism to government. We are now in the territory that political historians will write about at considerable length. A government elected with a mandate of this size, arriving at this position this quickly, is genuinely unusual. It is unusual because the problems are not primarily economic or legislative. They are personal and moral. The Prime Minister does not have a policy problem. He has a character problem. And character problems, unlike policy problems, cannot be resolved with a reset speech or a reshuffle. They compound. This has been British Connors. The next chapter of this story involves the documents that the U.S. Justice Department is reportedly holding, the internal labor whipping operation that is trying to keep a parliamentary party from open rebellion, and the question of whether the institutions of British governance are robust enough to process a Prime Minister who may have misled the House. We will be here for every single development. Subscribe to British Connors, switch your notifications on, and come back because this is nowhere near over. The sharp and slightly sassy reality check will be waiting for you.